Hello, welcome to Thrift Fest Uncycled, the digital edition of the Festival of Thrift. I'm Wayne Hemingway, the co-founder of the Festival of Thrift, and I'm here with Ruth Andrade, and we're going to have a talk titled Leaving the World Lusher Than We Found It. I think Ruth will say a few words about herself.
Hi, hello everyone. So as Wayne said, I'm Ruth and I work for Lush Cosmetics. Wow, it's really hard to introduce what I do, but I'll try to summarize it. At Lush, I'm involved in the team that we call Earth Care. And that really aligns to, I'd say, my life purpose. I work a lot with regeneration, regenerative design, development, and bringing regenerative ideas and principles to businesses, to civil organizations, to communities. And at Lush, I can express that through the work that we do in Earth Care, which is more your kind of environmental management, working with waste, water, energy and carbon, and also other activities at Lush. And I also work a little bit on our giving. So we have many giving programs, and I support some of the strategy around our giving. And then outside of Lush, I also do some really interesting stuff, everything to do with regeneration again. So I'm part of, and I help co-found, and I'm on the board of a couple of organizations, one called Re.Alliance, which is actually quite interesting because we are getting practitioners together in the informal humanitarian and development sector, trying to bring some more what we call trauma-informed ecological practice to sometimes areas of disaster, displacement, and also development, even though we don't love the traditional sense of the word. And then Regenerosity, where we're working towards not a model, but towards the concept of regenerative philanthropy, both working with regenerative projects that we say are doing the planet's most critical task, but also how can we transform the way we give in a way that's decolonial, that's more based on trust, and that's, more participatory. So that's a little summary.
Yeah, I mean, about 10 years ago, we started to kind of have the germ of the idea of the Festival of Thrift, which I think first came into being around 8 years ago now. It seemed that, it was quite a left field idea, and that we would really struggle to be able to talk to brands, because brands, obviously there'd been the history of, the wonderful Body Shop, and there'd been, we'd had our own history in Red or Dead of being, socially aware, but it wasn't mainstream. And then, the first festival that we did, we had, I think, 3 times as many people turn up. I think we expected 5,000, and I think 15,000 people turned up, and then it's grown and grown and grown. And it seems to me that now you can't, can you be a brand anymore without thinking about issues and starting to think about societal benefit and the environment? Is it possible now to be a brand without that?
I always use the word resilience, right? So if we don't have a stable economy and a more or less stable future, there is no brand. I think we're at a point now where, as a brand, everyone needs to make this choice. Either we contribute so that we can have a chance of having a future together, a stable economy, or we work against that, and then we're working with our own demise. I think that's one important aspect that's very, very pragmatic. You don't need to be, forward thinking or, green or eco in order to think that. And another that I think especially some quite big corporations have taken to themselves to push the climate movement forward, and to push some of these movements forward, even sometimes ahead of government, like pushing government. So I think it's a super important space.
What examples have you got of that, of where a brand is actually doing something that is influencing the government and influencing humankind ahead of what governments are doing?
There are some examples, just to give a couple from Lush. So everyone knows that at Lush, we make a lot of products that require no packaging. So we've been selling shampoo bars for 25 years. And then our tech team developed a tool that it's called Lush Lens. And you just use your mobile phone, you go over a Lush product, and it gives you all the information that would normally be in a packaging. And then in Japan, for example, we opened a store that had no packaging. And then we worked with governments to change legislation so we would be allowed to sell without packaging because we had created an alternative through digital. We also have the case of, for example, Natura in Brazil, who recently bought the Body Shop, and others like Danone. Natura and others have been working on the new science-based targets for biodiversity. And again, it's a group that's being led by, of course, there is civil society, but by some really large corporations. Danone also set up a group for biodiversity. Yeah, we have, Unilever has been doing also really excellent work around that. And there are more brands, especially here in the EU, pushing government towards no imported deforestation in the supply chains. And Lush has also been supporting this movement together with civil society. So I think this partnership between civil society and brands is super important to push government towards the right direction, to counter the lobbying of all the fossil fuel industries.
But it is still, you know, it is still really difficult because, you know, you look at fossil fuels, and an example is, you know, I've recently, so my personal journey through owning cars is, you know, I mainly use public transport, but the last few months of COVID have changed that a little bit. And I got our family got the first Prius that came in the country in 2003, the Toyota Prius. And we've kept saying that our next car would be 100% electric, but the Prius has kept going actually at 280,000 miles, which I'm very proud of. That's proper sustainable. But a few weeks ago, we took delivery. We bought we wanted to wait for an affordable electric car. So we got this Honda E, this cute little thing. And I've started so it's 100% electric. And you realize that the country is not ready for it. The amount of broken down charging points, you know, the amount of trying to find somewhere to get from one place to the other, and the sheer heartache of it. It's, you know, are we, you know, is this whole thing about changing to a sustainable future just for a few of us who are willing to wear a hair shirt, work really, really hard? Or are we, you know, when are we going to reach that tipping point where it becomes the norm that everybody accepts that packaging is stupid? Everybody accepts that anything that, you know, the internal combustion engine should be relegated to the 20th century. You know, there are so many things, but still it feels that we are, you know, we are in the minority, and it's easy to pat yourself on the back, but I'm not interested in that. I want it to be like wholesale societal change. What do we do to achieve that?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I don't think it's a question that anyone knows the answer. Otherwise we would have done it, you know, the environmental movement would have done whatever it takes 20 years ago. I think there are two main things related to this that I like to talk about. I think one is betting too much on green consumerism rather than a real change of culture and a real change of how the economy functions. So what we want to do is just make capitalism better. But there are some issues with capitalism itself. And we're seeing that now with great concentration of wealth, and only, for example, the people that can afford green innovation are the early adopters, and then everyone else trailing behind. So I think we haven't figured out what's the new economic model that can make the current one obsolete. I think that's one point of intervention.
So, well, what have you got an idea on that then? You know, what is the new capitalism?
Yeah, and that's why I'm saying I don't think we have figured that out. Otherwise, we would have done it. But of course, I have some ideas. I think it's much more based on the commons and coming out of this very individualistic mindset. I'm even thinking, like, if you take the waste or the packaging issue, if brands want to go alone, we're never going to change. Like, circular economy only exists in a hyper collaborative, you know, industry. So we need to be able to use each other's packaging, and maybe we need common packaging that doesn't look different, so it can keep going around without massive stock control of the right type of packaging. So it's like, when do I sacrifice my brand for the good of the collective? So instilling more, I think, collective ideals and the idea of the commons, right? So public transport is the commons. I think something that can really support this, we talk about universal basic income. And I think we should go for universal basic services. So how can we make education free and housing accessible? You know, really work on these fundamental basic needs in a collaboration between civil society and the government. I'm an anarchist. So, you know, if we go totally in that direction, I believe people are completely capable of self-governing.
Well, stop there for a second. I mean, is that danger?
Economies, I'd say.
You know, is it dangerous saying you're an anarchist? I mean, do we have to? You know, I think it does need. You know, I would describe you as an activist, probably. You know, but you know, how do we get activism more into life, and how many businesses are prepared to employ somebody like you who will say in an interview that you're an anarchist or an activist? How do we bring that to the fore? You know, you're working for Lush, you know, which, you know, I've got a history which hopefully we'll get time to talk about. But how can you go and work for Shell or somebody like that? You know, and could you have an impact there? And will they take you on?
I would never work for Shell. I think.
Hang on, I'm going to stop you there. So. But why wouldn't you? But doesn't Shell need an activist more than Lush needs an activist? For
sure. I think that are two ways of seeing this. One is, I'm certainly not a bridge builder. I want to push towards towards higher integrity rather than a compromise. So someone that works for Shell, it's someone that's willing to compromise the ethics a little bit to bring a business like that, you know, to modernize it. And then you have to have faith that that's possible. I'm not sure I have that faith. Lush, for me, is a really exciting place because I always say this, I could have worked, I'm an activist and I'm actually an anarchist. Like, I know a lot, I understand a lot, and I am. But at Lush, I can even express these self-organization ideals, right? My team is self-organized. There are other teams at Lush that are completely self-organized. And the idea that I can use Lush as my platform is super exciting for me. So I see it as a much nicer place than if I was working for an NGO. I can do so much more. I can influence Lush and be influenced by Lush. And then to be able to use everything that Lush has done in order to change the field, that's the stuff that I'm really interested in. And Lush is an activist brand, right? So we can push Lush for Lush to be kind of leading the way, and then leave other people to do the bridge building.
So how can individuals then, if you're an individual working with an organization, and you know, helping them stay activist, how can we've seen on television and we've seen in the press the last few years that, you know, Greta Thunberg influencing a young generation, probably like, you know, my generation. We didn't know the word sustainability. We knew thrift, we were brought up thriftily, but the idea of sustainability wasn't there. But now there's a whole generation. You know, first of all, the millennials dip their toe into it, then the Gen Zs get hold of it more, and now we've got the Gen Alphas, I think is I can't remember the name of I think it's Gen Alpha, the name of Greta's generation, who have had, you know, a young individual on the main news, at the start of the main news, in every single newspaper, talking about the issues that we're talking about the issues that Lush believe in, that you believe in, that the Festival of Thrift believes in. You know, number one, is that going to make a difference? Is that generation going to come through, do you think? And number two, if you are an individual, you know, how can you make a difference?
So I'll start with the last question, because I talk about that a lot at Lush. And one of the mistakes of the environmental movement was to focus too much on individual action. So we make people feel guilty and we place everything on individual action. So it depends on people's choice, and often it's a sacrifice, as we were saying before. So I should stop using plastic bags, and I should go vegan, and I should put solar panels on my roof if I have the money. That's super important. I always say, individual action is really important because it gives you integrity, so you can speak with lived experience. but we need to focus more on collective action. Like, what can we do? And I think this is what Greta's generation has figured out, and bringing more strongly, that it is about civil disobedience, and it is about putting pressure and taking the streets until people are heard. So not being content with just doing, I always think for every individual action, think about what's the collective action that you could do that connects you to that. So if I'm vegan, how can I promote veganism, get my friends to do it, or push the government towards, not buying meat from the Amazon, for example, like putting legislation around that. I think we need to become
how do you do that then?
Civil societies.
So how can somebody do that then?
Yeah, so I'd say start locally. So local bioregional organization is super important. And I think with COVID, we had already seen local Extinction Rebellion groups, local transition town groups. So for example, if you're not such an activist and you're a little bit more, let's say you don't want to be demonstrating against something, find your local transition towns. Find your Extinction Rebellion groups, find your mutual aid groups that formed around COVID. So get active locally, and then put pressure on the government. That means voting right. So even though I'm an anarchist, I think at the moment voting is actually important. Another one is write to your MPs. Like I write to my MP all the time. At least we make our views being heard. Use social media.
Does your MP reply?
Yes, with very conservative views, and I'm like, oh my God.
Go on, name the MP. Come on, we need to know.
No, but I do want to say one thing. They were trying drilling off the coast of Bournemouth. So they had a drill rig to do horizontal drilling for prospecting oil and fracked gas. And yeah, that was horrible. It was all about jobs, and it's like, oh come on, we're the sunniest county in the country.
Anyway, we better get onto some questions. I think we've got a load of questions coming in from people who are listening in. So the first one is from Sue. What is the biggest challenge in dealing with the environmental impact of COVID-19, and how may we begin to overcome it?
To be honest, like again, thinking at a macro scale, one of the biggest issues is that governments have spent the money that they had to for climate change mitigation. A lot of more progressive governments that spent a lot on supporting populations through COVID are going to be broke at the state level. So I think it has made climate change action at that level more complicated. I think same thing for corporations. We're going to struggle economically for a while. So at the same time, this is an issue. It's an opportunity for what we call build back better. So I think in the EU, this has been a big thing. So how can we make sure that any funding for recovery is connected to also sustainability goals and sustainability targets? And another thing is waste, right? It massively, like the plastic-free movement was going so well, and we had so many wings, including EU legislation, and all of that has been weakened. Like the plastic lobby is going at full speed at the moment. So, yeah, I think.
But again, this is one way the individuals can make the difference, isn't it? This is where, you as an individual, or, I'm saying you, I mean, everybody as individuals can choose not to buy plastic packaging. We can choose, we can choose not to buy a diesel car or a petrol car. We can choose all of those things. We can choose to get on a bike, rather than get on a bus. There are so many things we can choose to do.
Yeah. And I think at the same time, people have become more local. Like I think we've avoided, I think it was 17% of carbon emissions during COVID. But I think this is only going to result on a 4%, annual reduction. So I think I agree with you. I think this is the time, at least for the privileged people of the global north that could stay home and work from home. I think this was an important time to rethink about what's important and what kind of future do we want to create. And I think this is what the Generation Alpha is telling us. It's about intergenerational justice. How can we not leave the world completely screwed up for the young generations?
And I'm going to put my own question in quickly before bring another one in. How are Lush dealing with, obviously that you're in high street locations, in places that are supposed to have many thousands of people passing your front doors every day, and of which in most of those now there aren't, there's a substantial reduction. How's Lush dealing with that?
So like everyone, we saw our online sales increase, but the shops on the high street, they're struggling a little bit. Like it's super important for people to continue supporting the shops that they want to see go through this crisis. So I'd say the businesses that are already operating from different principles or from a different perspective, it's really important for people to support them through this time. And I think Lush is one of those businesses, but for sure we've been, badly hit. I think, yeah. And I think we're going to see more the fallout. So it's also, how do we quickly shift our business model to be able to continue to offer, better products or more eco-friendly products to people, even if they can't come to our stores. So it's a time for a rethink.
So the next question is from Stella, and I wonder if that's our Stella, Festival of Thrift Stella. There's only one Stella, it must be. How does sustainably sourced ingredients conflict with the need to use significant energy to transport both raw ingredients and goods produced?
Yeah. So at Lush, like we have mapped our supply chain and all the suppliers, and our biggest suppliers in terms of quantity, apart from cocoa butter, are all in Europe. So we do have, I wouldn't say a UK local, but we have a lot of European suppliers. But the supply of raw materials is really global. Like we use tons of cocoa butter that, come from Colombia, Costa Rica, now Sierra Leone.
So how, obviously one of the things that's been flowing through COVID is kind of people talking about the scale back of globalization. We've got big retailers like John Lewis, I've read, wanting to manufacture more closer to home. And you can see the positive side of that. Less, like what Stella's saying here, less energy used in transporting. Obviously, there's more creating jobs closer to home. And then you've got the kind of the extreme. You've got Trump, wanting to kind of just wipe globalization out of the equation. And then on the other side, you see horrible films that are really upsetting films from Bangladesh, where you see factories completely closed and mainly women who we know statistically have been hit harder around the world by COVID, without a job, not being able to feed the family. And so it's that balance between, what bringing closer to home, sustainably looking after developing nations and their manufacturing. What are your view on that, and how does Lush deal with it?
So I think there are two important movements there around deglobalization. So Lush, for example, we have factories in all the main markets. So we have factories in the UK, in East and West Coast of North America, Japan, Australia, Croatia, and Germany. So we don't need to transport finished products around the world. With raw materials, at least for the big bulk raw materials, we have direct sourcing. So we are buying from communities, and it tends to be a project that it's exactly what you're saying. It's meeting a local need for sustainable livelihoods, because also those countries, like, they need alternatives to very degrading livelihoods. And things like cosmetic materials like cocoa butter are perfect, if done correctly, to support regeneration, to help protect forests, to use agroforestry techniques. I think this is a transitional period. One thing that feels important to Lush, even though we don't get it right every time, is where do you add value? So making sure that we can reduce transport as well by adding value in the countries where things are produced. So for example, instead of bringing lots of moringa seeds to process moringa oil in Europe, we funded a moringa oil press with the community groups that we are working with. So we bring the oil. So unless it's a very specific process, we tend to support the groups to add value locally. And I think that already helps a little bit. So yeah, we're transporting bulk material, concentrated material, rather than just raw material goods, and economically makes sense to add value with the communities. And then I think we need to design this transition towards a bioregional economy. So, and I call it bioregional because I think we have a real danger of nationalism and nationalism rising. So how can we shift towards the idea of bioregional development, where at least the bulk of the economy is done bioregionally, but of course there's still going to be trade. And the shipping industry is the critical point. It will be like transport is the one that is the slowest moving when it comes to climate change, is the one that we really don't have very good solutions for. And it's the one that's going to require a lot of investment and innovation in the next few years. So I think it's important to localize supply chains, but leave those lifelines to countries where we're offering important livelihoods, but pay them better. So perhaps they also, can work less. If you know what I mean, like you don't employ so many people, employ fewer people paying more.
Right.
Fewer people paying more.
It's amazing how fast half an hour fast it goes. So our time is up. So thanks for doing this. Thanks for everybody for tuning in. There's lots more on Thrift Upcycled. So check the website, check these channels, and we are a year, hopefully, off the next physical Festival of Thrift. I absolutely can't wait. I've missed it, like I've missed so much these last few months, but it'll all be in the past, and we'll all get together again. So see you online over these next few hours and days. Check back in whenever you like. Check on Thrift 365. There's things there all year, and see you in person next year. And thank you again, Ruth.
Thank you.